friends! My name is Danny and this is Ale and Agony. And welcome on in and welcome to episode Legs 11. How sexy. So let's start as we always do with the ale of this week's episode, and I have popped into my local co-op and I've picked up a bottle of triple hop, which I believe is brewed specifically for the co-op by Robinson's Brewery in Stockport. So I'll be nomming down on that and get yourself cozy because I will be telling you about the case of Kitty Genovese. So let's crack it open. So Kitty Genovese, have you heard of that name? Maybe it rings a bell. Maybe when I say the phrase Bystander Effect, you might go, oh yeah, that sounds familiar. Well, the case of Kitty Genovese has been famous for decades. Her death has been recounted in numerous textbooks and sociology classes, and her murder is rumoured to be the reason for the creation of the 911 service in America. So, pretty fucking big. So what happened? On March 13th, 1964, at around 3:15 a.m, 28-year-old Kitty Genovese had finished work, driven home, parked up her car, and started walking towards her apartment home in Kew Gardens, which is a neighbourhood of Queens in New York. Kitty's apartment was only 100 feet from her parked car, but it was all too late. She had been spotted by a man named Winston Mosley. Winston ran up behind Kitty just as she approached her building's front door, and he stabbed her twice in the back. Kitty cried out and started screaming, but Winston continued stabbing Kitty and then raped her and left her to die. And it was famously reported that 38 of Kitty's neighbours saw everything that happened through their windows that overlooked the entrance to the building, and not one person called the police. Each neighbour assumed that the others would do something about the situation, or that someone else was clearly better equipped to handle what was going on. And so the bystander effect was born. The bystander effect is a social psychological theory that states that individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim where there are other people present. And Kitty's murder was the origin of this theory. But what if I told you that what is written in the textbooks is inaccurate, and the original source of the story, the New York Times, has since admitted to falsifying information with the purpose to sell more papers? Kitty is mostly known for the last 30 minutes of her life, but let's get to know her and talk about before. Kitty was an independent and, in my opinion, a badass bitch. She drove a red Fiat convertible and made triple the money of her male colleagues at her bartending job. Kitty was said to be really funny and quick-witted, and she also had a huge following of friends. When she was in school, she'd often make her friends laugh by mimicking their teachers, and mimicking her French teacher in particular. Kitty was known to play hooky with the girls in her clique and would skip class, and they would go to the beach or they would smoke on the roof. At the time of her death, Kitty was a bar manager, and she was described as the queen of the bar by the locals. She was thriving in New York. She was established. Kitty was one of 5 children, and she had made a huge impact on her younger brother William, also known as Bill. This is the second case in a row that had a William, aka Bill. I did not plan that. Not that clever. Anyway, Bill Genovese started to become slightly obsessed with his sister Kitty's murder and the idea that so many people could just stand by and do nothing. The infamous news article printed in the New York Times was centered around the 38 people who did nothing, rather than the one man who did everything. So Bill started to investigate who was there, who had eyes on the scene, who could have seen Kitty's murder. And the 38 witnesses had remained a mystery for decades. but Bill requested all information on the case from the New York Police Department. Back when the trial took place in 1964, Bill was obviously much younger, but he couldn't bear to go. But upon reading the transcripts, he discovered that only 5 of the 38 eyewitnesses were called to the stand. Isn't that bizarre? You have all these people, all these witnesses to this horrific murder, and you call on such a small fraction of them. As it turns out, lots of people said they heard screams, but they actually saw nothing. So official reports had most of the names redacted. But Cheeky Bill found some information in the state library, and the names were there. So let's talk about these witnesses. As Kitty was stabbed in the back by Winston, and as she was screaming, the doorman at the hotel opposite saw everything. But rather than call the police, he went to the elevator at the back of the building, he went down to his apartment, and he went to sleep. And I sincerely hope that if that man is still alive, that he sucks a big dirty dick. Neighbour Irene Frost said that she heard a shriek. She went to her bedroom window and saw a man and a woman outside, but nothing appeared to be happening, and so she went back to bed. Robert Moser heard some commotion. He went to his window, and he saw Kitty kneeling on the floor, and a man was stood over her. And Robert yelled at the man to get out of here. And so the man ran off down the street. And just before this, Irene Frost, the lady that just went back to bed, heard Kitty screaming again. And she was yelling, "Please help me. God, please help me. I've been stabbed." And she saw that Kitty was on her knees whilst Winston ran off down the street. Andree Picked heard a voice upstairs as the neighbours were screaming something, most likely Robert, who was screaming out of the window. And when she looked out of her window, she saw a man running off very quickly down the street. She then saw Kitty get up slowly. She was screaming for help, and she said that she then saw Kitty slowly start to walk up the street and around the back of the building. Andree was still at the window and felt very scared when the man came walking back down the street a few minutes later as if nothing happened. And she then watched as he followed Kitty around the back of the building when she heard, "Help, help," but she couldn't see what was going on. When Kitty and Winston moved inside to the hallway, her neighbour Carl Ross saw the second attack when he heard Kitty screaming, and he opened his door to look down to the stairwell. Winston looked up at him, and Carl went back to his apartment and called his girlfriend, not the police, and she said to him, "Don't get involved." And so, he didn't. So we have minimal involvement here. Some people have some very fucking questionable morals, and the most anyone did to help was Robert Moser, who shouted out of his window. No one went down to Kitty's aid. She was left alone in the street after she was stabbed, and no one came to her aid when she dragged herself around the back of the building to the apartment entrance. And she was left alone again in the hallway while she was stabbed, raped, and then left to die. But there was someone else involved in this story. Someone who was conveniently and purposefully left out of the New York Times article. Sophia Farrar was another neighbour who was close to Kitty, and they would often meet for coffee and catch up on life. Sophia got a call to say that Kitty was the woman who had been screaming, and she was hurt and bleeding in the hallway. So Sophia grabs her coat, runs down the stairs, and she finds Kitty, who is slumped up against the doorway just outside of the apartment complex. At first, Kitty resisted her friend Sophia and initially started fighting her off. And I assume that she thought it was probably Winston who'd come back for a third time. When Sophia calmed her down, she said she could feel the stab wounds on her back, and Kitty was gurgling and slowly passed away in her arms. Sophia said that she remembers distinctly the black leather gloves that Kitty was wearing, and that they were so cut up with all of the defensive wounds. And she just wishes that Kitty knew that she wasn't alone when she died, and that it was Sophia who was there with her. Sophia's son, Michael, remembers being woken up by a scream, and he said it was so loud. And he said that you could smell the blood for a long time in the hallway because it absolutely saturated the carpet. Michael also said that a lot of older people lived in the apartment building and noted that quite a few of them had numbers tattooed on their arms from concentration camps. And he theorised that they may not have wanted to get involved with the police, which is why they didn't do anything. But Sophia spoke to the reporters, and she told them her story of how Kitty did not die alone. But when the article was published, it simply left out her part of the story. They wanted to push the narrative of no one being there to help. So Kitty's parents passed away, believing that their daughter had died alone and not in the arms of her friend. Kitty's death, of course, shattered her family. Her oldest brother Vincent describes his father being so emotional that he couldn't even bring himself to go and identify Kitty's body. Vincent also says that the murder turned his mother into a total basket case, and his youngest sibling Frank had to go and live with family friends for a few weeks after the murder, and Frank wasn't allowed to go to the funeral. Everything that he learned about his sister's death was what was reported on the news. Ironically, Kitty's family had recently moved away from New York because they said that the crime was too high, but Kitty stayed behind. 2 years after Kitty's death, Bill went to serve in Vietnam as a Marine. He said he wasn't going to be a bystander to the war. And while serving, he unfortunately lost both of his legs. So the New York Times is really pushing this narrative of this bystander phenomena. And Phil just couldn't accept that not one person would do anything to help. And after finding out about Sophia, he knew that there must be other inconsistencies in the reporting of the case. Bill found other witnesses from the police transcripts that he found in the library, one of which was called Lynn Tillotson. So he went and found her, and she recalled the night very well, as of course you would. And she said that she heard a scream, she got up, she looked out of the window, but she didn't see anything, so she went back to sleep. She was in her early 20s at the time, and she told Bill that she felt totally safe in her neighbourhood. She'd walk out at night time all the time. And to be fair to Lynn, I've heard drunken girls just stumbling down the street in the middle of the night, and I've heard some random screams, and I honestly just haven't thought anything of it. So I do sympathise with Lynn just getting back into bed and shrugging it off. But the police statements claim that Lynn's mother told an officer that she heard Kitty say, "George, he's done it to me. Please help me." But Lynn said that her mother didn't even wake up that night, and she has no idea who George is. But Lynn and her mother were listed by the police as 2 of the 38 neighbours who were reported to have done nothing during Kitty's murder. And when Bill tells Lynn this fact, she is gobsmacked. She told the police that she didn't even see anything. So how could she be listed as one of the 38 eyewitnesses? Another neighbour and person listed in the infamous 38 is Hattie Grund, and she recalled her interview with police clearly. She told them that she heard someone shouting for help, and so she called the police. And when she told the police where she was and what was happening, they told her, "We've already gotten a call about the attack, so someone else has already made the call." Hattie said reporters were pushing the bystander story. She told the reporters that she called the police, but Hattie's call wasn't mentioned at all in the news articles. Police records also show that her call wasn't logged, and neither was the original one from the first neighbour who called in. So, it either wasn't logged on purpose or by incompetence, or maybe Hattie was falsifying what happened that night to ease her guilt. I'll let you make your mind up on that one, but based on what we've heard so far, I'm inclined to say it was a cock-up on the police's behalf. So what we know now is that most people heard the attacks, but very few actually saw anything. But all 38 were described in the media as eyewitnesses. And back then, the New York Times had a lot of clout, so people just believed what was printed. and it wasn't followed up by the police or their rival newspapers. Their biggest competitor, the New York Herald-Tribune, didn't even write up a rival piece to challenge the New York Times' story. But as we now know, many of the neighbours didn't even believe a murder was taking place. They mostly assumed it was just a drunken brawl between a man and a woman from the local pub down the road. And when a journalist at the Herald-Tribune asked the executive editor, Abe Rosenthal, of the New York Times, why they didn't include that the eyewitnesses didn't know that it was a murder, he said that it would have ruined the story. Rosenthal also went on to write a book about the case, and he wouldn't have earned all of his money if the real story was out there. And if that didn't make you dislike Mr. Rosenthal, he was also a huge homophobe, and he openly spoke about his desire to bomb third world countries. So I think another dirty dick is on order here. Where's the waiter? During Bill's investigation into his sister's murder, he found out that Kitty was married briefly to a man named Rocco, which no one had ever spoke to him about before. But following their split, her roommate, Mary Ann, became her lover and partner, and Bill had no idea that Kitty was bisexual or a lesbian, and he didn't think that any of his family knew either. But when Kitty was at work, she was very open about her sexuality. Everyone knew that she was gay. She was one of the boys. And one of her patrons recalls fondly of a time when Kitty got caught taking bet money to the bookies, and she was arrested. And this is where her famous mugshot has come from that you may have seen. Kitty's girlfriend, Mary Ann, tells Bill how they met in a bar. And Kitty approached her and she said, "Don't I know you from somewhere?" Mary said no, but she told her the apartment block that she lived in because maybe she recognised her from the area. And when Mary Ann got home one night, Kitty had left her a note on the front door saying that she was going to call the payphone across the street at 7 a.m. the next morning. And so she did. And Mary Ann was there waiting for the call. And everything blossomed from there. The police woke Mary up the night that Kitty was murdered, and it was Mary Ann who went to the morgue at 4 a.m. to identify Kitty's body. Mary recalls having an argument with Kitty one night, and Kitty surprised her with a dog from Carl's pet shop. And that is in fact the same Carl who saw the attack at the top of the stairs and called his girlfriend. And they decided to name their new dog Andrew. Mary said that after the funeral, Kitty's father told her that he wanted Kitty's dog back. And Mary tried to explain that it wasn't actually Kitty's, but it was hers. But she woke up one morning and Andrew was gone, and she never saw him again. Bill does confirm that Andrew was at his house, and he thought that his dad had picked him up to cheer up his mum, not that he had stolen him. So Mary's lost her girlfriend, and this was after trying to keep their relationship on the down low. And then she then had to go and identify her body because Kitty's parents just couldn't face it. And then they stole her fucking dog. And his mum didn't even want the dog. She said it made her feel much worse. And so soon, Andrew just disappeared from the home. Mary said that she slept with Kitty's shirt for a long time. And it was Mary who suggested that Bill might find closure by attending one of Winston's parole hearings and to finally face him. Winston Moseley. So, he said in interviews that he doesn't recall many details from the night of Kitty's murder, but he remembers the act itself. Winston was arrested 5 days after Kitty's murder while stealing a TV from a neighbour's house. This crime was called into the police, and this time they showed up. Officers recall Winston being very calm during the arrest, and they described him as small and meek. Charles Scholar, who was the prosecutor at the trial, said that Winston was like ice. Nothing seemed to faze him. Winston's defence attorney said that he had an IQ of 135 and he was highly manipulative. And Winston appeared to have a stable life. He had 2 kids, and he had a good, well-paying job, and he was very soft-spoken. So who would suspect this man of this seemingly spur-of-the-moment murder? Well, only 2 weeks before Kitty's attack, Annie Mae Johnson was also murdered by Winston Moseley. During his police confession, he described how he followed Annie from her car and up to her front door. He then shot her 4 times in the stomach with a rifle and then rolled her body into her house and raped her while her family were asleep upstairs. After this awful attack, Annie was somehow still breathing. So Winston wadded up some newspaper, he spread it around the house, and he lit a match and set the house on fire before fleeing the scene. On the night of Kitty's murder, he said that he went out with the intention of killing another woman. And he knew that people could see him in their windows, but he just didn't care. Winston recalls hearing Kitty's neighbour, Robert Moser, shout, "Hey, get out of here." And so he ran back to his car and he waited for a few minutes. And then he realised that no one was going to intervene and that the police weren't coming. And so he headed back up the street to find Kitty because he wanted to rape her and finish the job. Winston said that he found Kitty in the hallway of the apartments and Kitty screamed when he came in and walked towards her. And that's when pet shop owner Carl Ross opened his door and saw Winston standing over Kitty and went to call his girlfriend. Winston shortly realised that Carl wasn't going to do anything, and so he continued his attack on Kitty as she screamed so loudly that she woke up her sleeping neighbours. After the murder, Winston said that he went back to his car and he went to drive home. And then he pulled up behind a car parked at a green light. And as the car remained stationary, he got out his knife and he slowly approached the driver. And it was a man who had fallen asleep at the wheel. So Winston politely and gently woke him up and sent him on his way. And when the police asked him why he didn't murder him, he said, "I didn't feel that I wanted to kill that man in particular. But if that was a woman asleep at the wheel, I think we all know that she would have been another victim of Winston Moseley." After the trial of Kitty's murder, Winston was found guilty and sentenced to death. But, as usual, he appealed his sentence and it was reduced to life in prison instead. 4 years later, in 1968, Winston escaped prison and terrorised Buffalo in New York. He broke into multiple homes, he raped the women, and he took hostages at knife point when the police moved in, all over a 5-day period. And there is a photo of Winston during this arrest, and he looks like stupidly fancy. He's wearing a 3-piece suit with a long overcoat and a bowler hat. I don't know who the fuck this man thinks he is or where he got those clothes, but absolutely not. And nearly a decade later, in 1977, Winston studied for his sociology degree and wrote an editorial in the New York Times about being reformed. Bill was preparing himself to meet with Winston, but he had to be vetted beforehand, which I didn't know. I assumed if you wanted to see the man who murdered your sister, you could just go and see them. But a board of people need to know why he wants to see him and what does he want to achieve. Winston can say no if he wants to and he can refuse the visit. And if the board feel like it would upset Winston, they can also say no. You get the feeling that Bill's family are not okay with him seeing Winston. They think he's taking this all too far and he needs to stop. They say to him, "It's been 50 years and we're still talking about it." To his family's relief, Winston refused to allow the visit. He said that he's been contacted by media sources and is tired of being exploited. Journalists and family members of the people you murdered and raped who need closure are two very fucking different things. This made me so angry. when he gave this as his justification of refusing the visit with Bill. It's like, it's literally the only thing left that he can do to give this family some kind of closure after everything he's done. And to say that he feels like he's being exploited is just disgusting. Although Winston would not meet with Bill, his son Stephen reluctantly agreed. And in the documentary I watched, Stephen does appear to be quite standoffish and defensive of his father. He explains that he was only 7 years old when all of this happened. And Stephen, who is now a reverend, preaches to Bill that forgiveness will set him free. Stephen believes that if it wasn't for the notoriety of this story, that his father would have been paroled by now. But what about the murder 2 weeks before, Steve? Or the jailbreak, the rapes, the holding people hostage? Steve is very hard-faced when he flippantly says, this was 50 years ago. Winston has told his son that he snapped out at Kitty over racial tensions. Kitty was using a lot of racial slurs at him. It was a one-off. It was reactive. But when Bill points out that Annie, the other woman that Winston murdered, was African American, and that perhaps this wasn't racially motivated after all, Stephen said that he didn't know much about that murder, as him and his father had never really spoken about it. Stephen then oddly tells Bill that he was apprehensive about their meeting because he was told that Bill was part of a Genovese gang, and that before he met with him, Stephen's family warned him and said, "Don't go, you won't come back," which is very odd. And although Stephen is a grown-ass man, you can tell that he has been fed this bullshit story from his father, that he only killed Kitty because she was a racist. It was a one-off. And that, he wants to believe that Winston is a good man, and he's blindly trying to argue his defense with little evidence, and just completely ignoring Annie's murder and all the other awful things that his father has done. And a month after Stephen's visit, Winston sends Bill a letter. And in this letter, Winston tells Bill the truth about what really happened that night. And shocker, it doesn't involve Kitty being a racist. Winston said that he had been employed that night as a getaway driver for the real killer, an Italian mob member called Dominic. He saw Dominic run at Kitty from behind, and he thought he saw him punching Kitty in the back. When Winston asked why he would do this, Dominic simply replied, "She owed me." He then turned on Winston, and he said in his letter that it was very menacing, and he said, "Not a word about tonight to anyone. If you ever mention my name, if you ever talk, you'll be sorry. Your family will pay." 50 years after Kitty's murder. And this is what Winston comes up with after all of this time. Poor Bill, after so many years of trying to find all these 38 witnesses and try and piece together what has happened, he finally has the courage to meet with the murderer of his sister. And all he is left with is a bullshit letter from another man who deserves to suck a big dirty dick. The story has become an obsession for so many, and it is also taught in university sociology classes. This morbid realisation that so many people can watch this awful crime take place and just look on and assume and hope that someone else will help. My friend Stacey, who listens to the podcast, so hello! Stacey studied sociology at uni, and I asked her if she'd heard about this case. And she said it's one of the few things that she does remember. And although she remembers minimal details, she said that she recalls that Kitty was attacked in the street and loads of her neighbours saw and they didn't do anything. And they then, in the class, explored the reasons behind why this might be. So maybe it was because they didn't feel that it was their responsibility. Maybe the neighbours felt like someone else was better equipped to deal with the situation. So it's then trying to get into why all these people would not intervene. And the thing is that Stacey didn't go to uni that long ago, so it's scary to think that this false tale is still being told to classrooms around the world. So, when someone next mentions Kitty's name or the Bystander Effect, be sure to tell them that the news articles were false. They pushed the narrative that would sell papers and make money. Tell them that the neighbours did call the police and that Kitty died in the arms of her friend. And that, my friends, is the case of Kitty Genovese. Tell me what you think. What do you think? Have you heard of this? Have you studied this? Did you know everything that happened in the case? Come and talk to me about it. But let's take it back to the very beginning. How was my ale? It was really lovely, actually. It's very sweet. It's quite unusual. And it's very nice that I'm able to support a local brewery, although it's not local, sort of as in Stockport's down the road, or the fact that it's just UK based. But it's a nice 5.5%. It's refreshing, very unusual tasting. If you've got a co-op nearby, I recommend it. It's called the Triple Hop, and it's on 2 for £4 at the moment, or I believe it's £2.50 a bottle. So give it a go. In this episode's show notes / description, you will find the link to the documentary, which I found available on Amazon Prime, and it is called The Witness, and it is in fact free on Prime. And it has all of the footage of Bill talking to the surviving neighbours who heard Kitty that night. And it was really good. I really recommend it. If you've got some time, please watch it. Bill is just such an amazing man. Oh my goodness. The amount that he just keeps pushing and pushing. Fucking applause to him. You can find updates about new episodes over on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll be sure to post the photos of this case over on the Instagram page, and both pages can be found under Ale and Agony. If you would like to support the show and you have some spare cash and you want to throw it at me, then you can find me over on Patreon at patreon.com/aleandagony, and I'll be sure to give you a shout out next episode. And you can also get access to some cheeky bonus content over there from time to time. I've just released a bonus Patreon minisode on the Mandela Effect, so you can sign up to access that bad boy. And there's also another minisode on there as well as some sort of behind the scenes photos, posts and updates on the episodes that I am currently researching. I would, of course, be super grateful for any feedback and some more of those cheeky 5-star reviews over on Apple Podcasts, because those really help to bump me up the list of recommendations to people who would like to listen to true crime. Thank you for spending this time with me, and well done on getting through to the end. There were many, many dirty dicks. I hope to catch you on the next episode. Goodbye, my friends.